The courtroom was silent except for the sound of his lies filling the air like poison. My own brother, under oath, claiming I'd stolen from our family business. What he didn't know was that I had been recording our conversations for months. Hit like and subscribe if you've ever been underestimated by your own family. If you've ever watched someone you trust to destroy your reputation with a smile on their face. My name is Kate. I am 32 years old and I live in Portland, Oregon. Until 6 months ago, I thought I knew what betrayal looked like. I understood the weight of family loyalty and the price of forgiveness. I was wrong about both. The rain drummed against my apartment window that Tuesday morning when everything changed. I was sitting at my kitchen table, laptop open, reviewing quarterly reports for our family's landscaping business when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Mom, but the voice that greeted me was strained and formal. Kate, we need to talk, Can. You come to the house? There was something in her tone that made my stomach clench. After 29 years of being her daughter, I knew every inflection of worry, disappointment, and anger in her voice. This was different. This was fear of, course, is everything okay? Just come now. The drive to my childhood home in southeast Portland took 15 minutes, but it felt like hours. I parked behind my brother Danny's truck, noting how he carelessly blocked half the driveway, even in crisis. Some things never changed. The front door was unlocked, as always. I found them in the living room. Mom perched on the edge of the sofa, her hands twisted together, and Danny sprawled in Dad's old recliner like he owned the place, which, according to the will, he would someday. Kate, Mom's voice was barely above a whisper. Sit down. I remained standing. What's going on? Danny cleared his throat and leaned forward. At 35, he still had the cocky smirk that had gotten him out of trouble our entire childhood. We've been looking at the books, Kate, the business accounts. Okay, I kept my voice steady. And there's money missing. His eyes never left mine. $50,000, maybe more. The words hit me like a physical blow. What are you saying? I'm saying, Danny continued, his voice taking on that condescending tone I'd heard 1,000 times before, that you're the only one with access to those accounts besides me. And I sure as hell didn't take it. Mom finally looked up at me, and I saw something that nearly broke me in half doubt. After everything I'd done for this family, everything I'd sacrificed, she was actually considering that I might have stolen from them. You think I stole $50,000? The question came out sharper than I intended. I don't want to think that, Mom said quietly. But, Kate, honey, you handle all the finances. You write the checks, you do the deposits. If money is missing, then it has to be me, I finished. The sentence for her tasting bitterness, because Danny would never do anything wrong. Don't turn this around, Danny snapped. This isn't about favoritism. This is about math. The money is gone, and you're the one who had access. I stared at him, really looked at him. The expensive new watch on his wrist that I noticed last week, the designer jacket hanging by the door, the way he'd been taking extended lunch breaks, and mysterious phone calls. Pieces of a puzzle I hadn't wanted to solve were clicking into place. Show me the accounts, I said. Danny hesitated for just a moment, but it was enough. I already went through everything. The evidence is pretty clear. Show me. He pulled out a laptop and opened a spreadsheet. The numbers were there, black and white, showing transfers from our business account to what appeared to be personal accounts. My personal accounts, according to the routing numbers. But I knew something Danny didn't know I knew 3 months ago. I'd become suspicious of some irregularities in our books. Not anything dramatic, just small discrepancies that nagged at me. So I'd done what any careful accountant would do. I'd started keeping detailed records of every transaction, every conversation, every decision made about the business, and I'd started recording our phone calls. These account numbers, I said, pointing at the screen. They're wrong. What do you mean wrong? This isn't my account number. It's close, but it's off by 2 digits. I pulled out my phone and showed him my banking app. See? This is my actual account. These transfers went somewhere else. Danny's face went pale, but he recovered quickly. Maybe you opened a second account. Maybe you're lying. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Mom looked between us, her face crumpling with the weight of having to choose between her children. "I'm not lying," I said quietly, "but someone is." That night, I went home and listened to every recording I'd made over the past 3 months. Danny's voice, clear as day, talking about creative accounting and temporary loans that the family would never miss. Danny laughing about how easy it was to manipulate the books when your sister trusted you. Danny bragging to someone on the phone about his new investments and how he'd found a way to fund them without anyone knowing. I sat in my apartment until dawn, listening to my brother's voice describe me as too stupid to notice and pathetic enough to take the fall if anyone ever figured it out. Each word was a knife, but I took them all because I knew something he didn't. Silent revenge, I thought, was going to be so much sweeter than the loud kind. The next morning, I called a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but Sarah Morrison, the best. Corporate attorney in Portland, she'd represented our landscaping business before. So she knew the family dynamics. More importantly, she knew how to win. "Kate," she said after I'd explained the situation, "this is going to get ugly. Are you prepared for that?" I've been preparing my whole life. We spent the next 2 weeks building a case. Sarah subpoenaed bank records, traced the fraudulent transfers, and documented every piece of evidence. The money trail led to an investment account in Danny's name. Opened 6 months ago, the timing was perfect, right after Dad died and left Danny in charge of the business operations. But the real breakthrough came when Sarah's private investigator discovered something beautiful. Danny had been working with Marcus Chen, a financial advisor who specialized in helping clients hide assets. Marcus had been under investigation by the SEC for months, and Danny's name was all over their files. "This is bigger than family embezzlement," Sarah told me over coffee. "Your brother has been using the business as his personal piggy bank to fund some very questionable investments. We're talking about potential federal charges." I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt hollow. This was my brother, the same person who taught me to ride a bike and had protected me from bullies in middle school. The same person who'd held my hand at Dad's funeral and promised we'd keep the family together. But then I remembered his voice on those recordings, talking about me like I was disposable, like I was nothing. What do we do next? I asked. "We give him a chance to come clean. If he confesses and agrees to pay everything back, we might be able to keep this out of criminal court. If he doesn't, he won't confess," I said with certainty. Danny has never admitted to being wrong about anything in his entire life. I was right. When Sarah and I met with Danny and his hastily hired attorney the following week, he maintained his innocence with impressive conviction. He had explanations for everything. The investment account was funded by a loan from a friend. The suspicious transfers were accounting errors, and the timing was purely coincidental. "My sister has always been jealous of my success," he said, looking directly at me. "She's been looking for a way to undermine me since our father died. This is just another attempt to make herself look important." His words stung, but I kept my face neutral. Sarah had coached me well. "Mr. Morrison," Danny's lawyer said, "my client is willing to consider a settlement to avoid the expense and publicity of litigation. Perhaps we can reach an agreement that acknowledges this was all a misunderstanding." Sarah smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "I'm afraid that's not possible, you see. We have evidence that proves your client not only stole from the family business, but also attempted to frame his sister for the theft." "That's ridiculous," Danny said. "What evidence?" Sarah placed a small digital recorder on the table. 3 months of recorded conversations between you and your sister. Conversations where you discuss your creative accounting methods and your plans to blame Kate if anyone discovered the missing money. The color drained from Danny's face. "You can't record someone without their permission. That's illegal." "Actually," Sarah said calmly, "Oregon is a one-party consent state. Kate was a participant in every conversation, which makes the recordings perfectly legal. Would you like to hear them?" She pressed play. Danny's voice filled the room, arrogant and careless. "The old man left me in charge for a reason. Kate's just the bookkeeper. She does what I tell her to do." Another clip. "If anyone ever figures out about the transfers, I'll just say Kate set up the accounts. She's so eager to please, she'd probably apologize for getting caught. And the worst one, Kate's always been the family screw-up. Mom and Dad were just too nice to admit it. When this comes out, it'll finally prove what I've always known. She's worthless. The silence in the room was deafening. Danny's lawyer looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. Danny himself sat frozen, his mouth slightly open. The recordings are just the beginning, Sarah continued. We also have documentation of your investment activities, your relationship with Marcus Chun, and a very detailed analysis of how you manipulated the business accounts to cover your tracks. Danny's lawyer whispered something in his ear, but Danny brushed him away. This is all a setup. Kate's trying to destroy me because she's always been jealous. She's the one who stole the money. And now she's trying to frame me. I finally spoke. Danny, I've spent the last 5 years working 60-hour weeks to keep our family business alive. I've turned down job offers, relationships, and opportunities because I believed in what we were building together. I would never steal from this family. Bullshit, he said, his composure finally cracking. You've been planning this for months. You probably stole the money and then created all this fake evidence to make me look guilty. Sarah gathered her papers. I think we're done here, Mr. Morrison. You have 24 hours to decide whether you want to work out a settlement or face criminal charges. Choose wisely. As we left the office, I felt strangely calm. For the first time in months, I knew exactly what was going to happen next. Danny didn't choose wisely. Instead of confessing or negotiating, he doubled down on his story. He filed a counter lawsuit claiming I had embezzled money and was trying to frame him. He gave interviews to local business publications, painting himself as the victim of a vindictive sister who couldn't handle being passed over for leadership of the family company. Kate has always had problems with authority. He told Portland Business Weekly, "Our father knew he couldn't trust her with real responsibility. That's why he left me in charge." The article ran with the headline, "Family Business Torn Apart by Sibling Rivalry." My phone started ringing with calls from reporters wanting my side of the story. I referred them all to Sarah and said nothing. But Danny's public relations campaign had an unexpected effect. The story caught the attention of Detective Maria Santos from the Portland Police Bureau's Financial Crimes Unit. She'd been investigating Marcus Chun for months, and Danny's name kept appearing in her files. "Ms. Rodriguez," she said when she called me, "I understand you've been having some issues with your brother regarding missing money from your family business." "That's correct. Would you be willing to cooperate with a criminal investigation?" I thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. Yes. The next month was a blur of depositions, interviews, and legal maneuvering. Danny hired an expensive criminal defense attorney and continued to maintain his innocence. He even convinced Mom to support him publicly, issuing a statement about how the family stood behind him during this difficult time. Seeing my mother's name on that press release was almost worse than everything else combined. She'd chosen him just like she always had, the golden child who could do no wrong, even when faced with overwhelming evidence of his guilt. But I wasn't. The same person who'd sat in that living room 6 months ago, absorbing accusations and doubt. I'd found my voice, and I wasn't going to be quiet anymore. The criminal trial began on a rainy Tuesday in November. I sat in the witness box, wearing a simple black dress that Sarah had helped me choose, and told my story. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Linda Chun, no relation to Marcus, walked and through the evidence methodically. "Miss Rodriguez, can you identify the voice on this recording?" "That's my brother, Danny Morrison. And what is he saying?" I listened to the playback of Danny's voice. "Kate's so naive. She'll never figure it out, and even if she does, who's going to believe her over me? He's discussing his plan to embezzle money from our family business and frame me for the theft. Danny's attorney objected repeatedly, but the evidence was overwhelming. The recordings, the financial documents, the testimony from Marcus Chun, who'd taken a plea deal, and the bank records all painted the same picture. Danny had systematically stolen from the business over a period of 8 months, using his position as operations manager to cover his tracks when it was Danny's turn to testify. He stuck to his story. He claimed I doctored the recordings, falsified the documents, and conspired with Marcus Chin to frame him. He painted me as a jealous, unstable woman who'd been plotting against him since our father's death. Kate has always resented my success, he said from the witness stand. She's never been able to accept that our father trusted me with the business because I was the better choice. This entire case is her revenge for being passed over. I watched him lie under oath, his voice steady and convincing. For a moment, I almost admired his commitment to the performance. Then I remembered all the nights I'd worked late to clean up his mistakes, all the times I'd covered for him when he disappeared during business hours, all the years I'd believed his promises. That we were partners, the jury deliberated for 3 hours. We find the defendant guilty of embezzlement in the first degree. Danny's face went white. His expensive attorney put a hand on his shoulder, but Danny shrugged it off. As the bailiff led him away, he looked directly at me. "I hope you're happy," he said. "You've destroyed our family." I wasn't happy. I was something else entirely. I was free. The sentencing hearing was held 2 weeks later. Danny received 8 months in prison and was ordered to pay full restitution plus damages. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, didn't mince words, mister. More saying, you didn't just steal money from a business. You betrayed the trust of your family and attempted to destroy your sister's reputation to cover your crimes. This court finds your actions particularly reprehensible given the intimate nature of your relationship with the victim. After the hearing, I stood on the courthouse steps, breathing the cold December air. Sarah joined me, carrying a briefcase full of documents that would help me rebuild the business. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Tired," I said honestly, but also relieved for the first time in months. I know who I am again. Mom was waiting by my car when I reached the parking garage. She looked older than her 62 years, her face lined with grief. And confusion, Kate, she said quietly. "I owe you an apology." "You don't owe me anything." "Mom, yes, I do. I should have believed you from the beginning. I should have known that you would never steal from this family." She paused, wiping her eyes. "I failed you as a mother." I wanted to be angry with her. Part of me had been carrying that anger for months, feeding it with every slight and every moment of doubt. But standing there in the parking garage, looking at my mother's broken face, I realized that anger was just another weight I didn't need to carry. "You didn't fail me," I said. "You were put in an impossible position, and you made the best decision you could with the information you had. That's not failure, that's being human." She hugged me then, and I let her. We stood there for a long time. 2 women who'd been torn apart by someone else's lies, and were finally finding their way back to each other. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now, I rebuild the business, I hire good people, I create systems that prevent this from happening again, and I move forward. Can I help?" I thought about it. "If you want to." She nodded, still crying. "I want to. I want to do whatever I can to make this right." Over the next few months, I threw myself into rebuilding Morrison Family Landscaping. I hired 2 new employees, implemented better financial controls, and expanded our services to include year-round maintenance contracts. The business not only survived Danny's theft, but actually began to thrive. I also started a blog called Silent Revenge, where I wrote about my experience with family betrayal and financial fraud. The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of people shared their own stories of being betrayed by siblings, parents, and spouses. Many of them had stayed silent because they were afraid of destroying their families. "You gave me the courage to speak up," one reader wrote. "My sister had been stealing from our mother for years, and I was too scared to say anything. After reading your story, I realized that protecting the family means protecting all of its members, not just the ones who seem most important." The blog grew into something bigger than I'd expected. I started getting speaking requests from business organizations and family law groups. I appeared on podcasts and wrote articles for magazines. People seemed to connect with the idea that sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply telling the truth. Danny was released from prison after serving 14 months, He called me once, about a week after he got out. "Kate," he said, his voice different than I remembered, smaller. "I need to talk to you. I'm listening. I'm sorry for everything. The stealing, the lying, trying to blame you. I'm sorry for all of it." I sat in my office, looking out at the garden I planted behind the building. It was spring and everything was coming back to life. "I appreciate you saying that," I said finally. "I know you probably can't forgive me. I know I destroyed everything, but I wanted you to know that I realized what I did was wrong. I realized that I hurt you in ways that go beyond just money. Danny, I forgave you months ago, not because you deserved it, but because I deserved to be free from the anger." He was quiet for a long time. "What does that mean?" "It means that I'm not going to let your choices define the rest of my life. I'm not going to carry your guilt or your shame. I'm going to build something better and move forward. Is there any chance we could try to rebuild our relationship?" I thought about it honestly. I don't know. Trust isn't something you can just decide to feel again. It has to be earned over time. And it has to be earned through actions, not words. I understand. But Danny, I don't hate you. I'm not going to spend the rest of my life plotting against you or hoping you fail. I'm going to focus on my own life and my own happiness. That's the best revenge of all. After I hung up, I sat in my office for a long time, thinking about everything that had happened, the betrayal, the trial, the slow process of rebuilding trust with my mother, the business that was now thriving beyond anything I'd imagined when I was just Danny's little sister who handled the books. I thought about the woman I'd been 18 months ago, sitting in that living room, absorbing accusations and doubt. She'd been so eager to please, so desperate to be accepted, that she'd lost sight of her own worth. She'd been willing to absorb other people's failures and take responsibility for their choices. I wasn't that woman anymore. The next morning, I got a call from a producer at a major television network. She'd read my blog and wanted to discuss a documentary about family financial fraud. "Your story is exactly what we're looking for," she said. "It's about more than just money. It's about family dynamics, gender roles, and the courage it takes to stand up for yourself when everyone expects you to stay quiet." I thought about it. Part of me wanted to keep my story private, to rebuild my life away from the spotlight. But another part of me remembered all the messages I'd received from people who'd been in similar situations. People who'd been blamed for other people's mistakes, who'd been expected to absorb the consequences of other people's choices. "I'll consider it," I said. "But if I do this, I want to make sure it helps other people. I don't want it to be just about my family's drama." That's exactly what we had in mind. 6 months later, the documentary aired. It was called Silent Revenge: When Family Betrays Trust, and it featured not just my story, but the stories of 5 other people who'd been betrayed by family members. The response was overwhelming. Support groups formed in cities across the country. Lawyers started specializing in family financial fraud cases. The phrase silent revenge became shorthand for the idea that sometimes the most powerful response to betrayal is simply refusing to be silenced. I received thousands of messages from people who'd watched the documentary. Some were from people who'd been in similar situations. Others were from people who'd been the betrayers and were looking for a way to make amends. One message stood out. It was from a woman named Jennifer in Phoenix. "Kate, I watched your documentary last night, and I cried through the whole thing. My brother has been stealing from our family business for 2 years, and I've been covering for him because I didn't want to hurt our parents. After watching your story, I realized that I'm not protecting my family by staying silent. I'm enabling him to hurt all of us. Tomorrow, I'm calling a lawyer. Thank you for giving me the courage to speak up." That's when I knew that everything I had gone through had been worth it. Not just for my own healing, but for the healing of families I'd never meet, people who'd been struggling in silence. Thinking they were alone, the business continued to grow. We expanded to 3 locations and started offering landscaping design services. Mom became my business partner, bringing decades of experience and a renewed sense of purpose. We developed a relationship that was stronger than it had ever been, built on mutual respect rather than old patterns of favoritism and guilt. Danny found work as a bookkeeper for a small nonprofit organization. He called me occasionally, usually around holidays, and we'd have brief, polite conversations. He was seeing a therapist and attending financial crimes recovery meetings. He seemed to be genuinely working on understanding why he'd made the choices he had. I didn't trust him, but I didn't hate him either. He was like a distant relative now, someone connected to my past but not involved in my present. That felt like the healthiest possible outcome 2 years after the trial. I was invited to speak at a conference for family business owners. The topic was preventing internal fraud and maintaining family relationships. I stood at the podium, looking out at an audience of men and women who were struggling with the same challenges I'd faced. The hardest part about family betrayal, I told them, isn't the financial loss. It's the way it makes you question everything you thought you knew about the people you love. It's the way it makes you doubt your own judgment and your own worth. I paused, remembering that morning in my mother's living room when I'd been too, shocked to defend myself properly. But I learned something important through this process. The people who betray you don't get to define who you are. They don't get to write your story or determine your value. You get to do that. And sometimes, the most powerful revenge is simply refusing to let their choices destroy your sense of self. After the conference, a young woman approached me. She was maybe 25. With the kind of nervous energy that comes from carrying a heavy secret. "Miss Rodriguez, I think my sister is stealing from our family's restaurant. I've been noticing irregularities in the books, but I'm scared to say anything because she's my parents' favorite. They'll never believe me." I looked at her, seeing myself. "From 3 years ago, what's your name?" "Amy. Amy, can I give you some advice?" She nodded. "Don't wait. Don't hope it will get better on its own. Don't convince yourself that you're wrong or that you're being paranoid. If you suspect something, investigate it, document everything, and if you find evidence of theft, report it immediately. But what if I'm wrong? What if I destroy my family for nothing? And what if you're right? What if you stay silent and she steals even more? What if other family members get blamed? What if the business fails and everyone loses their livelihood?" I put my hand on her shoulder. "Amy, protecting your family means protecting all of its members, not just the ones who seem most important." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "I know you're right. I just don't know if I'm strong enough. You are. You're stronger than you know, and you're not alone. There are resources available. People who can help you navigate this. Don't let fear keep you silent." She thanked me and walked away, but I could see the determination in her shoulders. She was going to do what needed to be done. She was going to find her voice. That night, I sat in my apartment, looking through the messages I'd received since the documentary aired. Stories of betrayal and recovery, of families torn apart and rebuilt, of people who'd found the courage to speak up and people who'd found the strength to forgive. I thought about the journey I'd taken from that scared, confused woman in my mother's living room to the person I was today. It hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. I'd learned that sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones who think they know us best. They assume we'll stay silent, because we always have before. They assume we'll absorb their guilt because we've been trained to take care of everyone else's feelings. But I also learned that we don't have to accept those assumptions. We can choose to speak up. We can choose to defend ourselves. We can choose to demand better treatment from the people who claim to love us. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Sarah, my attorney who'd become a close friend. "Kate, I just wanted to check on you. I saw the news about the conference." "I'm good, really good. Actually, I'm proud of you, what you've built, how you've handled everything. You've turned a terrible situation into something that's helping people." "It wasn't really a choice," I said. "I could either let it destroy me or use it to build something better. I chose to build." That's exactly what I mean. Most people would have just focused on getting through it. You focused on growing through it. After we hung up, I opened my laptop and started writing a new blog post. It was titled "The Difference Between Revenge and Justice." And it was about the choice we all face when we've been wronged. We can choose to tear down the people who hurt us, or we can choose to build something better for ourselves and others. Silent revenge, I wrote, isn't about hurting the people who hurt you. It's about refusing to let their actions define your future. It's about speaking your truth, protecting yourself and others, and then moving forward with grace and dignity. It's about understanding that the best revenge isn't revenge at all, it's freedom. I finished the post and hit publish. Within an hour, it had been shared hundreds of times. People were commenting with their own stories, their own insights, their own journeys from betrayal to healing. I closed the laptop and looked out my window at the city lights. Portland looked beautiful tonight, full of possibility and promise. I was 35 years old, and I was finally living the life I'd been meant to live all along. Not as someone's little sister or someone's employee or someone's victim, but as myself, strong, independent, unafraid, the woman who'd sat in that courtroom 2 years ago, listening to her brother lie under oath, had been transformed by the experience. She'd learned that sometimes the most powerful response to betrayal isn't silence or forgiveness, or even anger. Sometimes it's simply refusing to be silenced. Sometimes it's finding your voice and using it to help others find theirs. Sometimes it's understanding that the people who underestimate you are giving you the greatest gift of all, the element of surprise. And sometimes the most beautiful revenge is simply becoming the person you were always meant to be, despite their efforts to keep you small. I thought about Amy, the young woman from the conference, and hoped she would find the courage to speak up. I thought about all the people who'd reached out to me over the past 2 years, sharing their stories and finding their strength. I thought about Danny, and hoped he was finding his way to genuine redemption. I thought about Mom, and how our relationship had become stronger than it had ever been. But mostly, I thought about myself and how far I'd come from that scared, confused woman who'd been willing to accept blame for someone else's crimes. I was Kate Rodriguez. I was 35 years old. I lived in Portland, Oregon, and I owned a thriving landscaping business. I was the author of a popular blog about family dynamics and financial fraud. I was a sought-after speaker who helped families navigate difficult situations with grace and dignity. And I was no longer afraid of being underestimated, because I learned that when people underestimate you, they're not just insulting your abilities. They're revealing their own limitations. They're showing you that they don't have the imagination to see who you really are or what you're capable of becoming. And that, I discovered, was the most useful information of all. The next morning brought a new message to my blog. It was from a woman named Lisa in Denver. Kate, I've been following your story for 2 years now, and I wanted to thank you. My husband was embezzling from our joint business and blaming me when the books didn't balance. I was so gaslighted that I actually started to believe I was incompetent. Your story gave me the courage to hire a forensic accountant and uncover the truth. He's been arrested, and I'm rebuilding the business on my own. For the first time in years, I feel like myself again. Thank you for showing me that speaking up isn't selfish, it's necessary. I smiled and typed back, Lisa, thank you for sharing your story. You didn't just save your business, you saved yourself. That takes incredible courage. I'm proud of you. And I was, because that's what this had all been about, really, not revenge or justice or even healing. Though those were all important, it was about giving people permission to trust themselves, to speak their truth, and to refuse to accept treatment that diminished their worth. It was about understanding that sometimes the most radical act is simply refusing to be silent. As I prepared to start another day, I thought about the title of my blog, Silent Revenge. It had started as a way to describe my decision to quietly gather evidence against Danny rather than confront him directly. But it had evolved into something bigger. Silent Revenge wasn't about being quiet at all. It was about choosing your battles wisely. It was about gathering your strength and your resources before you acted. It was about understanding that the most powerful response to betrayal isn't always the loudest one. Sometimes it's the most strategic one. Sometimes it's the one that builds something beautiful from the ashes of something broken. Sometimes it's the one that helps not just yourself, but everyone who comes after you. I opened my laptop and started writing again. There were more stories to tell, more people to help, more families to heal. The work was far from over, but I was no longer the same person who'd started this journey. I was stronger, wiser, and more. Compassionate, I'd learned that you can survive the worst betrayal and come out better on the other side. I'd learned that family isn't just about blood, it's about respect, trust, and genuine love, and I'd learned that sometimes the most beautiful revenge is simply becoming the person you were always meant to be, despite everyone who tried to. Keep you small, that was a lesson worth sharing. That was a story worth telling. And that, I realized, was exactly what I'd been doing all along. The months that followed brought unexpected developments. Marcus Chun, Danny's former financial advisor, was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for running what prosecutors called a sophisticated scheme to help wealthy clients hide assets and evade taxes. The investigation revealed that Danny had been just one of dozens of clients who'd used Marcus's services to launder money through fake investment accounts. Detective Santos called me one afternoon with news that made my blood run cold. "Kate, we've uncovered something else. Your brother wasn't just stealing from your family business. He was also involved in a larger money laundering operation that affected several small businesses in the Portland area." I sat down heavily in my office chair. "What does that mean?" "It means that the $50,000 he stole from you was just the beginning. He was using your business as a front to clean money from other sources. The total amount we're talking about is closer to $200,000. $200,000. I felt dizzy thinking about it. How did we not notice? He was very careful. He'd move money in and out quickly, usually over weekends when you weren't monitoring the accounts as closely. He'd also created false invoices for services that were never performed, making it look like the business was more profitable than it actually was. This explains so much the mysterious cash deposits Danny had made periodically, claiming they were from cash customers who paid for landscaping services, the invoices for companies I never heard of, the way he'd insisted on handling certain aspects of the accounting himself. Detective Santos, what does this mean for the business? Are we in legal trouble? No, you're not in trouble. You and your mother are considered victims in this case, but you may need to testify in additional trials as we prosecute the other members of this network. Over the next 6 months, I found myself back in courtrooms, testifying in 3 separate trials each time. I heard more details about the scope of Danny's crimes. He hadn't just betrayed our family. He betrayed other families, other small business owners who trusted him with their livelihoods. The most devastating testimony came from Elena Vasquez, who owned a small restaurant in southeast Portland. Danny had convinced her to let him handle her books in exchange for landscaping services. Over the course of a year, he'd systematically drained her accounts, leaving her unable to pay her suppliers or her employees. "I trusted him because he was Kate's brother," she said through tears. "Kate had always been so honest and reliable. I thought her family would be the same." Sitting in that courtroom, listening to Elena describe how Danny's theft had nearly destroyed her restaurant, I felt a new kind of guilt. Not guilt for what I'd done, but guilt for what I hadn't seen soon enough. How many other people had been hurt because I'd been too? Trusting, too willing to give Danny the benefit of the doubt? After Elena's testimony, I approached her in the hallway. "Mrs. Vasquez, I'm so sorry. I had no idea Danny was doing this to other people." She looked at me with tired eyes. "I know you didn't know, but Kate, your brother used your reputation to gain my trust. He told me that you'd recommended him, that you'd said he was good with numbers. I never said anything of the sort. I would never have recommended Danny for financial services. I knew he was careless with money. I know that now, but at the time I believed him. He seemed so confident, so professional. And he was your brother." We stood there in the courthouse hallway, 2 women whose lives had been derailed by the same person's greed and manipulation. But Elena's story was different from mine. She didn't have the resources to hire a top attorney or conduct a lengthy investigation. She'd been a working mother, trying to keep her restaurant afloat, and she trusted the wrong person. Rs. Vasquez, I want to help you. I can't undo what Danny did, but I can help you rebuild." She shook her head. "I can't afford your services. I'm not talking about hiring me. I'm talking about helping you as one business owner to another. I've learned a lot about financial systems and fraud prevention over the past year. I'd like to share that knowledge with you. Over the following months, I began working with Elena and two other business owners who'd been victimized by Danny's schemes. We met every Saturday morning at Elena's restaurant, going over their books, setting up new financial controls, and developing strategies for recovery. It was during one of these Saturday meetings that I realized something profound. Helping these women rebuild their businesses was healing something in me that I hadn't even known was broken. For years, I defined myself in relation to Danny as his younger sister, his business partner, his victim, but working with Elena, Maria, and Susan, I was discovering who I was on my own terms. I was a teacher, I was a protector, I was someone who could take the worst experience of her life and use it to help others avoid similar pain. Kate, Elena said one morning as we finished reviewing her quarterly reports, I have something to tell you. My restaurant is finally profitable again. For the first time since before Danny, I'm making money. The other women cheered, and I felt tears spring to my eyes. Elena's success meant more to me than any victory in court ever had. There's something else, she continued. I want to hire you as my accountant, not for charity, but as a real client. I trust you, and I want to support your business. The other women nodded agreement. Within a month, I had 3 new clients and a waiting list of small business owners who'd heard about my work through word of mouth. But the most significant development came when I received a call from Janet Morrison, a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. Kate, I've been following your story in the news. I need to talk to you about something important. We met at a coffee shop in downtown Portland. Janet looked nervous, her hands shaking slightly as she stirred her latte. I should have called you months ago, but I was scared. Danny made me promise not to tell anyone. Tell anyone what? About the money he borrowed from me, $25,000, 2 years ago. He said it was for a business investment, that he'd pay me back with interest within 6 months. I stared at her. Janet, Danny never mentioned borrowing money from you. He made me promise to keep it secret. He said it would embarrass him if the family knew he needed help. He was so convincing, so sure that his investment would pay off. She paused, looking miserable. I never got a penny back. $25,000. I thought about all the times Danny had talked about his successful investments, all the expensive purchases he'd made that I'd assumed were funded by legitimate business profits. Janet, why are you telling me this now? Because I realized that I was an accessory to his crimes. My money probably helped him steal from other people. If I'd spoken up sooner, maybe Mrs. Vasquez wouldn't have lost her savings. Maybe other people wouldn't have been hurt. I reached across the table and took her hand. Janet, you were a victim too. Danny manipulated you just like he manipulated everyone else. But I enabled him. I gave him money that he used to hurt other people. You gave money to someone you trusted. That's not a crime. And it's not your fault that he misused it. Janet's story opened another chapter in the investigation. When Detective Santos interviewed her, she discovered that Danny had borrowed money from at least 6 other family members and friends, always with the same story about temporary investments and guaranteed returns. The total amount of Danny's thefts and fraudulent borrowing was eventually calculated at over $400,000. The scope of his crimes was staggering, affecting dozens of people across multiple states. But the investigation also revealed something else. Danny had been planning his crimes for years. Police found notebooks in his apartment detailing his business plans, which included specific strategies for manipulating family members and targeting vulnerable small business owners. One entry, dated 6 months before Dad's death, made my blood run cold. Kate trusts me completely. She'd be the perfect fall guy if anything goes wrong. Everyone expects her to make mistakes anyway. Reading those words in a police report felt like being stabbed all over again. Danny hadn't just decided to free me when he got caught. He'd been planning to betray me from the very beginning. But there was also something liberating about seeing his thoughts laid out so clearly. It confirmed what I'd suspected, but hadn't wanted to believe. Danny's actions weren't the result of desperation or poor judgment. They were the result of calculated malice. The final trial in the money laundering case lasted 3 weeks. Danny testified in his own defense. Claiming that he'd been coerced by Marcus Chen and other members of the criminal network, he portrayed himself as a victim who'd gotten over his head and made poor choices out of fear. But the evidence was overwhelming. The notebooks, the recorded conversations, the testimony from multiple victims, it all painted a picture of a man who'd systematically targeted the people who trusted him most. The jury found him guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to an additional 4 years in federal prison, to be served consecutively with his state sentence. In total, he would serve at least 6 years behind bars. As the judge read the sentence, I felt a complex mix of emotions: relief that justice had been served, sadness for the brother I thought I knew, and something else, a sense of closure that I hadn't expected. After the trial, I was approached by a journalist from the Oregonian who'd been covering the case. Ms. Rodriguez, you've become something of a symbol for people who've been betrayed by family members. How do you feel about that? I thought about the question carefully. I don't think of myself as a symbol. I think of myself as someone who was put in an impossible situation and tried to handle it with integrity. If that helps other people find the courage to speak up when they're being mistreated, then I'm glad. What would you say to someone who's going through a similar situation? I'd say that you're not responsible for other people's choices, but you are responsible for your own response to those choices. You can choose to stay silent and enable harmful behavior, or you can choose to speak up and protect yourself and others. It's not an easy choice, but it's the right one. The article ran the next week with the headline, "The Accountant Who Wouldn't Stay Quiet: How Kate Rodriguez Exposed a Family Fraud Network." It was picked up by national news outlets and shared thousands of times on social media, but the response that meant the most to me came from Amy, the young woman I'd met at the conference months earlier. "Kate, I wanted to let you know that I took your advice. I investigated my suspicions about my sister, and I found evidence that she'd been stealing from our restaurant for over a year. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. But I reported it to the police. She's been arrested, and she's agreed to pay restitution and get treatment for her gambling addiction. Our family is devastated, but we're also relieved to finally know the truth. Thank you for giving me the courage to speak up." Reading Amy's message, I realized that my story had come full circle. I'd started as a victim of family betrayal, but I'd become something else entirely. A resource for other people facing similar challenges. The Silent Revenge blog had evolved into a support network for people dealing with family financial fraud. I'd partnered with attorneys, accountants, and therapists to create resources for victims and their families. We'd helped dozens of people navigate the complex process of reporting family members for financial crimes. But the work wasn't just about criminal justice. It was about healing. It was about helping people understand that they weren't alone, that they weren't crazy for feeling betrayed, and that they deserved better treatment from the people who claimed to love them. 1 year after Danny's final sentencing, I received an unexpected visitor at my office. It was him, accompanied by a prison counselor and wearing the kind of humble expression I'd never seen on his face before. "Kate, I asked to see you because I wanted to apologize in person. Not because my lawyer told me to, not because I'm trying to get out of prison early, but because I need you to hear this from me." I looked at him across my desk, this man who'd been my brother, my business partner, my betrayer. He looked older, thinner, worn down by years of consequences. "I'm listening. I know that saying sorry isn't enough. I know that I hurt you in ways that can't be fixed with words, but I want you to know that I understand now what I did to you, to our family, to all those other people." He paused, his voice breaking slightly. "I was so angry about Dad leaving you an equal share of the business. I felt like I deserved more because I was older. Because I was the son, I convinced myself that you were stealing my inheritance. So I started stealing from you. Danny, Dad left us equal shares because he valued us equally. That wasn't something I did to you. I know that now. I know that my anger was about my own insecurities, not about anything you did. I was jealous of how smart you were, how good you were with numbers, how much Dad respected your judgment. Instead of trying to earn that respect for myself, I decided to tear you down." I sat quietly, processing his words. Part of me wanted to forgive him completely, to tell him that we could rebuild our relationship and move forward as a family, but another part of me remembered the recordings, the notebooks, the years of planning that had gone into his betrayal. Danny, I appreciate you telling me this. I appreciate that you're taking responsibility for what you did, but I need you to understand that forgiveness isn't the same as trust. I can forgive you for my own peace of mind, but I can't pretend that things can go back to the way they were. I know I'm not asking for that. I'm just asking for you to know that I'm sorry, and that I'm working every day to become someone better than the person who hurt you. The prison counselor, who'd been silent throughout our conversation, finally spoke. Kate, Danny has been participating in our financial crimes rehabilitation program. He's been working with other inmates to help them understand the impact of their crimes on their victims. He's also been taking accounting classes so that he can help other people manage their finances legally when he's released. I looked at Danny with new interest. Is that true? Yes, I figured if I was going to spend the rest of my life making amends, I should start by learning how to actually help people instead of hurting them. We talked for another hour. Danny told me about his therapy sessions, his plans for when he was released, and his hopes for eventually rebuilding relationships with our family members. He didn't ask for forgiveness, didn't try to minimize what he'd done, and didn't make promises he couldn't keep. When the visit ended, I felt something I hadn't expected. Hope. Not hope that we could return to being close siblings, but hope that Danny could become a better person than he'd been. Hope that some good could come from all the pain he caused. Driving home from the prison, I thought about the journey I'd taken over the past 3 years, from victim to advocate, from silence to speaking up, from isolation to community. I'd learned that healing wasn't a destination, but a process, one that required daily choices to move forward rather than backward. I'd also learned that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting or excusing harmful behavior. It was about choosing not to let other people's actions define your future. It was about taking back your power and using it to create something better. That evening, I wrote a new blog post titled, "What Forgiveness Actually Means." It was about the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation, between healing and forgetting, between moving forward and moving on. Forgiveness, I wrote, doesn't mean pretending that harmful actions didn't happen. It means choosing not to let those actions control your emotional well-being. It means taking back your power to define your own life. The post went viral, shared by thousands of people who were struggling with similar questions about family betrayal and healing. The comments section became a support group of sorts, with people sharing their own stories and offering advice to others. But the comment that stood out to me came from someone unexpected. My mother, Kate, I'm proud of the woman you've become. I'm proud of how you've handled everything, how you've turned your pain into purpose. I'm sorry it took me so long to see your strength, but I see it now, love, Mom. Reading those words, I realized that my family had been rebuilt, just not in the way I'd expected. It was smaller now, built on truth rather than tradition, on respect rather than obligation. But it was stronger than it had ever been. 5 years after that first terrible morning in my mother's living room, I stood in the same spot. But everything had changed. The house looked different. Mom had redecorated, removing the photos of Danny and replacing them with pictures of the new life we'd built together. "Kate," she said, joining me by the window, "I got a letter from Danny yesterday." "Oh, he's being released next month. He wanted to know if he could come to dinner when he gets out." I thought about it. "What did you tell him?" "I told him that he's welcome to visit, but that he needs to understand that things are different now. That he needs to earn his place back in this family through actions, not words." "That sounds fair." "He also asked me to give you this." She handed me a letter addressed in Danny's handwriting. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single page, written in the careful script of someone who'd had a lot of time to think about his words. "Kate, I know that I'll never be able to fully make up for what I did to you, but I want you to know that I've spent every day of the past 4 years working to understand how I became the kind of person who could hurt his own sister. I've learned that my actions weren't the result of desperation or poor judgment. They were the result of choices I made because I valued my own comfort more than other people's well-being. I'm working to become someone different, someone who adds value to the world instead of taking from it. I don't expect your forgiveness, but I hope that someday you'll be able to see that I'm genuinely trying to be better. Your brother, Danny, I folded the letter and put it in my pocket. I think I'd like to see him when he gets out. Not because I'm ready to trust him, but because I want to see who he's become. Mom nodded. I think that's wise. We'll take it one day at a time. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on how much had changed since this whole ordeal began. Morrison Family Landscaping had grown into one of the most successful landscaping companies in Portland, with 23 employees and contracts throughout the Pacific Northwest. My blog had become a resource for thousands of people dealing with family financial fraud. I'd written a book about my experience, with proceeds going to support services for fraud victims. But the most important change was in me. I was no longer the woman who'd been willing to absorb other people's failures to keep the peace. I was someone who spoke up when something was wrong, who protected herself and others, who refused to enable harmful behavior even when it was easier to stay quiet. I was someone who'd learned that the most powerful revenge isn't about hurting the people who hurt you. It's about refusing to let their actions define your future. It's about taking back your power and using it to create something better than what was destroyed. That night, I received a message from a woman named Sarah in Atlanta. Kate, I've been following your story for 2 years. My father-in-law has been stealing from my husband's business, and my husband refuses to confront him because he doesn't want to destroy the family. I've been documenting everything, and I'm ready to take action. Your story gave me the courage to speak up. Thank you for showing me that protecting the family sometimes means protecting it from itself. I smiled and typed back, Sarah, you're doing the right thing. It's scary, but it's necessary. You're not destroying your family, you're protecting it. I'm proud of you for finding your voice, and I was proud of her, just like I was proud of Elena, whose restaurant was thriving, just like I was proud of Amy, who'd saved her family's business by speaking up about her sister's theft, just like I was proud of the hundreds of people who'd shared their stories and found the courage to protect themselves and others. This was what healing looked like, not a single moment of forgiveness or revenge, but a daily choice to use your experiences to make the world a little bit better. It was about understanding that your pain has purpose, that your voice matters, and that you have the power to transform even the worst betrayal into something meaningful. I thought about the woman I'd been 5 years ago, sitting in that living room, absorbing accusations and doubt. She'd been so afraid of conflict, so desperate to be loved, that she'd been willing to accept treatment that diminished her worth. I wasn't that woman anymore. I was someone who'd learned that real love doesn't require you to stay silent when you're being hurt. Real family doesn't ask you to absorb other people's failures to keep the peace. Real loyalty doesn't mean protecting people from the consequences of their actions. I was someone who'd learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable harmful behavior. Sometimes the most family-oriented thing you can do is protect innocent family members from the ones who would hurt them. Sometimes the most loyal thing you can do is tell the truth, even when it's painful, and I was someone who learned that the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's becoming the person you were always meant to be, despite everyone who tried to keep you small. Have you ever been betrayed by the people closest to you? Share your story in the comments. Someone out there needs to hear it. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is remind each other that we're not alone, that we're stronger than we know, and that we deserve better than we've been accepting. Your voice matters, your story matters, and you matter. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise.